topic is a hard one, and so we are in for a very difficult conversation. But on the other hand, we have with us a very inspiring, courageous, and extremely energetic woman who is going to lead us in understanding this hard issue from a global to local perspective. Erliani Abdulrahman is a diplomat turned activist with a long list of accomplishments and accolades for her activism. You have her bio in the handout that was handed out at the door. I encourage you to read it. We also displayed a number of her accomplishments in the PowerPoint that was circulating before the event. So I'm not going to go into details. We are going to bring her to the stage and ask her to tell her story herself and deliver it through that personal messaging. We are also honored this evening to have Jim Bensley with us to moderate the discussion with Erliani. Jim Bensley is the director of NMC's International Service and Service Learning Center. Through the center, Jim and his colleague Stephanie Prahl provide the outstanding study abroad program that NMC puts out and also runs a global certificate. Jim is an instructor of world cultures and an active and treasured board member of the International Affairs Forum. So please join me in welcoming Erliani and Jim to the stage.
So welcome, Lynn. We're so glad to have you here tonight, this evening, to provide us with a closer look into the global child sexual abuse and human trafficking piece. Not only what it is, but how it is treated, and most importantly, how it can be reduced. So before we start with the questioning here, I just want to let the audience know that the topic that we're talking about tonight may have a special significance for you. It may be something you may have experienced or a friend or family member has. If so, and you want to talk to somebody, we're lucky that we have a number of highly skilled professionals in the Grand Traverse area. In fact, tonight we do have Jordan Dean from the Child Advocacy Center, who has a table right outside. So please, if you would like to talk more about that following the presentation, please stop by and see her. Okay. So like many in this room, Lynn, you've had a number of career paths. So take us back to your diplomatic days when you served in the Singapore Foreign Service. What sparked your initial interest in that field? How did you get the job? Where did you serve, and what were your responsibilities?
So, I was one of those dorky kids. I knew at the age of like 11 that I wanted to become a diplomat. And it's actually a funny thing, but I watched the Miss Universe competition. The question where they asked about world peace? That really got me hooked. True story. And so my childhood heroes was Nelson Mandela of South Africa and Aung San Suu Kyi of Myanmar, then, not the Aung San Suu Kyi now. And so from the age from about 11 and 12, I started picking up foreign languages, so German at 12, French and Mandarin at 18. I really started learning Arabic and Malay, my mother tongue, as a young child, and so I started picking up the languages. And I got accepted. It was very competitive, but I think not as competitive as it would be here in the US. There were maybe 100 applicants, only 7 of us got in. And I got posted to Berlin, so that's because I speak German. And I was first secretary there, so number 3 in the hierarchy. And then I was posted to Delhi, India, as political counselor. So again, number 3, a much bigger mission, and more people under me. But the responsibilities were more as well. It was interesting being female, being Asian, a minority, because people, and also being Asian, you have this, people think you're a lot younger than you are. I'm 43. There you go. And so, in Berlin, again, my title was first secretary, and they always assumed that I was a translator or a secretary. Nothing wrong with that, but it was very hard for people to understand what the work was. And as a counselor in India, people always assumed that my male diplomats were the ones in charge. And even though I was the head of say, in a room, they would automatically just go to my male colleagues, and they would have to say, she's the one. So, yeah, what was your last question?
So where did you serve as a diplomat? And what were your responsibilities in that profession?
So I was number 3. For example, in like a scenario planning exercise, if there were any disasters that were to befall India, I would be the head of operations. And so one of the things that we did was we covered Nepal from India and was to prepare like a contingency plan. And when the earthquake hit Nepal a few years ago, I think most of you remember that, we were actually ready. And we were able to extract our citizens and permanent residents within a week. We flew our Chinooks, our helicopters, and brought them out. So that's the kind of thing that we do. It's not just foreign policy. It's also for people on the ground, our citizens, permanent residents who live in Singapore. That could be an American as well.
Thank you. So I understand you first became interested in the proliferation of child sexual abuse when you were 17.
Yes.
Okay, what was the impetus for that focus, and how did it affect your work as a diplomat?
Well, first of all, I'm actually a survivor, an incest survivor. So the perpetrator was my grandfather, my mom's dad. And I kept it a secret to myself in my childhood, in my teenagehood. But when I was 17, I saw a video documentary on dowry burning. So what that is that in South Asia, there's this culture of, when the bride gets married, you will give some dowry along with her. But it could be a washing machine, a cow, money, a motorcycle. But if they feel that it's not enough, they will burn her so that they can get a new bride. And so I saw the video where this lady was on her deathbed, and they were trying to then promulgate the laws such that deathbed confessions would be taken into account. She was trying to tell the names of her attackers. And I was so angry by that I would promise to myself before I turned 40 that I would give a voice to the voiceless, which is why I do what I do today.
Great. And did we want to see some of the statistics you...
I just thought now would be a good juncture, because it's also quite technical, to just go through the definitions of what human trafficking is, and then we can then go through some of the stories. So if you see here, child sex trafficking involves engaging a person younger than 18. That's usually the universal definition of a child in commercial sex act. With human trafficking, it's any form of fraud or coercion or force to do forced labor or, again, a commercial sex act. Here in the US, you can see here, this is a national human trafficking hotline that's operated by Polaris. You can see the numbers, 23,000 survivors in 2018 alone. So this is the ones that they found, not the ones just in total. And these are the 3 different types. So you have sex trafficking, which I'm sure a lot of you are aware of, labor trafficking, that could be animal husbandry, domestic work, and you can have also both labor and sex trafficking. So that could be illicit massage parlors, strip clubs, bars. Here in the US, the numbers kind of vary depending on what you're looking at. Up to 20,000 come in every year, mostly from Mexico and the Philippines. Some numbers say up to 17,000. And in 2018, half of them, of the active criminal cases, are child sex trafficking cases. So that's really a cause for concern. And then globally, it's 25 million people. So what do we mean by this? Again, it's forced labor and child sex trafficking, and of which 5 million are children. So even in today's day and age, you still have slaves, and 5 million are children. So I was just going to go back to your question. This is the work that I do today. I work with the Nobel Peace Laureate, Kailash Satyarthi, and he's based in India. And what we do is rescue children. He's rescued more than 90,000 children from child sex trafficking and child labor over the last 40 years. So I lived 5 years in India, and I took no pay leave to work for him just to figure things out, to see whether this will work. This is a picture of a father united with his daughter after she gone missing for 3 years. So she's from the state of Assam, you know, the tea producing part of India, and they took her down to Delhi. And with India, it's so big as a subcontinent. There's 24 official languages, but literally there's hundreds of languages. She cannot communicate. The police know only Hindi or English, or that's usually what traffickers do, move them away from where they know, and then in different language, different contexts, they are lost. And we found her. We have people on the ground. We try to look for children, also through technology, facial recognition software. But we found her, and she was working as a maid, and her employer was sexually abusing her. When she was reunited with her father, she was only 14. She was taken at 11.
Some obviously very horrendous things. So obviously there are many reasons that sexual abuse and human trafficking continue today, including poverty, patriarchy, family dysfunction, and sometimes even those antiquated ideas of cultural acceptance. Mm-hmm. Was there an initial aspect that you wanted to focus on when you began this journey? In other words, was there a place where you felt that you could bring about the greatest change?
I think for me, it was really child sexual abuse because it's what I experienced, and I wanted no other child to have gone through what I've gone through. And you can teach your child about good touch and bad touch, but really, if it's somebody within the family, how do I begin to tell my mom that it was her dad? And so for me now in my work, I have my own nonprofit in Singapore as well, called Yakin, Youth, Adult Survivors, and Kin in Need. I try to create tools so that people, for example, what I'm trying to do in Pakistan, in India, and also in Kenya, is for children to tell me their stories. Then we will curate them, and we have a graphic illustrator go through and make all the drawings, so any one drawing cannot be attributed to any particular child. But what each story will illustrate would be a different situation, a different perpetrator, your coach, your teacher, the school teacher, somebody, an uncle, a dad. And so the child can come home and say, hey mom, hey dad, can you read this chapter? And then you can read it along with your child. But there will also be an accompanying guide for parents and educators to help you through the process, because it's not easy for a layperson.
Okay. So after you set off on this path and made this decision to look at this in more detail, you were able to actually write a best-selling book entitled Survivors, Breaking the Silence on Child Sexual Abuse. And it's interesting because in it you focus on 5 men and 7 women from 8 different countries. And I find it particularly interesting that you were crossing borders essentially to document their stories. How did you begin that project and conduct that research, and what did you learn about abuse and how it occurs and how specifically countries respond, both legally and in civil society?
So with this book, I put out an email and wrote to everybody I knew and said, in December 2014, hey, I'm going to write this book. Could you please recommend me people who might want to come forward and tell the stories? And so in this book, some people use pen names, most of them did, but 2 did not. And then as we went out and we had book readings, so I had book readings in Yale University, I had it in Montreal, South Africa, Slovenia, Singapore, Berlin, many places. I bring along the survivors with me. Especially important to me is to give a voice to the male survivors, because you don't hear about them. And there's 2 of them who are from here, from the US. One's from Iowa, and the other one is up in Montana. And I invite them to come with me to read out excerpts from the chapters. And with these 5 men in my book, some of the perpetrators were their grandmothers or their mothers. And again, you don't hear about that, female perpetrators. It's always this myth that it's always a male perpetrator and a female victim. And so with the stories, they feel empowered, the survivors. People in the audience who have been through abuse or think they have been through abuse and need to start the journey, come in there, learn from the whole experience, and go out and seek professional help. We also talk to the loved ones. There could be one of you in the audience who wants to know what to do with somebody that you know and love. How do I affirm his or her healing journey? How do I begin to do that? And so we talk about that as well in my book readings. So this book was published in 2017, and now it's in its third print run. And I'm hoping to work on a sequel because now I want more stories of people of color and those of LGBTQI orientation. Now your last question was on...
Yes, so what are some of the countries that, obviously it happens in every country of the world, but did you find some countries that were doing notable things to help eradicate this or identify it?
I think I can speak from my experience working with the Nobel Peace Laureate Kailash Satyarthi. So what we do is we would conduct a raid with the police. There's a standard operating procedure that was put in place after he won the Nobel Peace Prize. And we will go in with photographic evidence or video evidence to the police, but not long, only 10 minutes before. If we tell them off any longer than 10 minutes, they will tip off the mafia, who would then whisk away the children, and we never see them again. And so 10 minutes before, we go up to the police guy, bring him along with us, and say, this is the evidence, raid the place. So it could be a home. It could be like a home setting where they do garment factories and stuff like that. And I've been on some of those raids in Delhi. We take the kids out. We rescue them. They are frightened. They have no idea what's going on. Sometimes they sit in a place with no window. They have rice once a day, twice a day, nothing else with it, maybe lentils once a week. They get paid the equivalent of $2 a week, if even that. And they haven't seen their families for years. And so we put them in a shelter in Delhi, and for a period of 2 weeks up to 2 months, we process what's going on. We document their injuries, and we present their case in front of a district magistrate. And with that, we hope to get back wages, which would be put into a fund for them, which no one can touch until he or she reaches 18. So their parents cannot touch them, and it's very important. Because what happens also is that after we finish the process, we ask the parents, hey, do you come and pick up your child again? Those parents were the same ones who sold them in the first place. So we have to ask the child, is the child's right? Where do you want to go now? And they say, my mom, or my dad, or my parents. And we know sometimes it is, they sold them. So we call them, they come, and we say, okay, they do it again. Okay, we hopefully rescue them again, bring them back. Third time around, we say no more. We'll bring you to our permanent shelter. It's in Rajasthan, next to Delhi. And there we, depending on how old they are. So if they are older, in their teens, it's too late for them to go into school. So we give them vocational training. The younger kids, they go to normal school, and we have a schedule for them, so there's structure in their lives. So they do yoga in the morning, they do sports, they play cricket, football. It's secular, so they celebrate Christmas, Diwali, Eid, everything. And then they come. The thing is, people like me, I'm foreign. It's irrelevant, my experience to them. But some of these boys whom we've helped, they come back. They're now engineers and lawyers. And they come back and they say, I was one of you. And then it gives them hope, because for many, many years they lived without hope. And this is amazing, because I never see a place where, I have 2 brothers, where everyone's so peaceful together and so loving to each other. So it's beautiful. It's Rajasthan, so it's Aravalli Hills, where the Mughal emperor had his hunting grounds. It's beautiful. And that's where we go with our permanent shelter. We also have more like a base for girls and young women to learn things like sewing. And right now we're looking into a project to start making sanitary napkins, because again, awareness of menstruation is an issue in India. And so we're also doing that with the women of the community. Did I answer your question?
Yes, good job.
Let's go on.
And I want to make note, if you haven't seen the exhibit that the Dennis Museum has on 40 chances, there are some photographs, and some of those photographs are in India and other places and involve victims of child sexual abuse or slavery. So please check that out and help support what Howard Buffett and some of the others are doing to try and eradicate that nationally or internationally. So sometimes we think of the Scandinavian countries as being far ahead of others on social issues. Mm-hmm. Do you see that with child sexual abuse?
In fact, I do, and I think it's really interesting. Here in the U.S., prostitution is illegal, except in certain counties in Nevada, and in many countries, it's the same. In Sweden, back in 1999, they changed the law so that they would go only after the pimps and the facilitators, but they will not penalize the prostitutes. And therefore, this change means that you're recognizing prostitution as a barrier to gender equality and as a form of violence. So I really like this model. And I think also with this model, you're trying to shift the attitudes of people towards prostitution that actually is harmful, but just being more concerted about going after the perpetrators. Why do I say this? Because in countries where sometimes prostitution is illegal, if the law enforcement officials, like in India, for instance, if the law enforcement officials don't know the difference, when they reach on the ground and there's somebody who's there who's either a prostitute or a trafficking survivor, I have no idea what to do, they just go after prosecution and persecute the prostitute when he or she actually needs help. And that can be a danger. And I see that in my work in India.
So the next question I have for you, having talked about those countries, is where does the United States fall in this spectrum? Are we doing a good job? Are we behind the ball on this? Where are we?
One of the most authoritative references when it comes to human trafficking is the TIP report by your government, the US state government. So every year it issues the TIP report, the Trafficking Persons report. And last year is also indicative. So the US is always tier 1, but much more can be done. India is tier 2 because there's still issues with prosecution, how they follow up, the collusion of the police as well with state-run institutions, for example, shelters, where people we know, we move them there to get rehabilitated, but then they are re-trafficked. And that's a problem because the state officials are also involved. In one case in the state of Bihar, which is northeast India, they found 5 bodies of girls who had been trafficked. They died afterwards, and they buried them in the ground. But there was such an uproar that the government went to delve down and look into this. But the state of Bihar was really an anomaly. I don't see that happening elsewhere in other states. So can we do more here in the US? For sure, yes.
So it's often not easy to talk about this subject, and that's in the United States. So tell us, how does this topic of child sexual abuse, how is it looked at in different countries? Is it discussed, especially in countries that have a very strict religious hierarchy or religious attitude or belief system?
It's really difficult. One of the privileges of being a diplomat is that you can have engagement with high-level officials, and I leverage that. I still keep in touch with the Home Minister in Singapore, like your person in charge of Homeland Security. He's in charge of all the police force in Singapore. He was previously in the Foreign Service, that's why I know him. But when I had a meeting with him, when I first tried to do this, when I first left the Foreign Service, he told me, what happened to your grandfather? Let bygones be bygones. Let sleeping dogs lie. And for me, it was not about bringing up the name of my grandfather. It's about mainstreaming the issue, breaking the taboo surrounding it. And if he is the head of the police force, and he's the head of all these police officers, what does it say about the culture that we have in Singapore? And that for me was problematic. Also, when I met his deputy, the person running the show day to day, he said, come talk to us about sensitizing the police when it comes to child sexual abuse. Because in most countries, you want to have the police force train how to deal with children who have been sexually abused. How do you treat them? He wasn't interested in that at all. So this is really difficult because if Singapore is like this, what does it mean for other countries? How do they look at it? In India, in my experience, the previous Minister for Women and Child Development, she wasn't so interested in this issue, quite honestly speaking. The current minister, Smriti Irani, is doing a better job, but they're still not doing as much. They have a fund that was set up in 2012 that was because of this Nirbhaya rape, the rape of this girl on the bus. She was just going to see The Life of Pi, an English movie. You and I have seen it. And on the way home at 9:30 p.m., she was raped on the bus. Her boyfriend was pushed out. They inserted rods into her and pulled out her intestines. it became such an uproar. They were trying to push the problem away from India because they were having demonstrations and riots every day. And so they took on a plane and moved to Singapore. Obviously, I was in the embassy at the time. It was my job to monitor what's going on. And we were afraid that there would be a backlash against us, Singapore, because if she died there, she did die there. We were told about her death before it was released to the media. But the people of India are very intelligent. They knew what was really going on. So yes, because of that incident, they did this fund called the Nirbhaya Fund, and even up to now, it's still not utilized. So I think enforcement on the ground is really difficult. It's always good to have legislation. The issue right now is how do you enforce it? How do you make sure that things happen? How do you make sure the kids are protected? We have instances in India where the police would not file a case, and we would then say, okay, with this new law enacted in 2012, we can take you down. We will report you as a barrier to justice. And then they'll be afraid. But normal layperson doesn't know that. It's the nonprofits like us who comes forward and say, be the intermediaries and say, if you don't report it, we will report you. So it's a very difficult thing. It really depends on country to country. There's many studies being done. There's one by the Economist Intelligence Unit. It's called Out of the Shadows. It was released late last year, where they compared 40 countries. The US is number 5 on the list. The 40 countries constitute 70% of the world's children's population. And India was number 13, the US number 5. But again, a lot more can still be done because there are still many issues that can be improved in any way.
Yes, it's such a horrendous cycle, and it is a cycle often. It repeats itself with families and children and things. So are there organizations that you work with specifically, international organizations, I know you're a member of some, that you believe are doing a good job to advance the actual...
The cause.
Yeah, the advocacy of child human sexual abuse?
I think, yes, this man. So I was telling a story earlier for lunch. That's not his real name. It's really hard to pronounce it. Kailash means the name of a mountain that they revere in the Himalayas. And Satyati means seeker of truth in Sanskrit. Why did he change his name? Because in India, his actual name was Nipendra Sharma, but Sharma was his caste name. It meant that he was a Brahmin, the highest caste. And when he was 15, he invited people, the untouchables, to come and eat with the politicians, the highest elite. The politicians never came that night. And so he ate with the untouchables. Remember this, he was a Brahmin. He came home, and there were priests waiting at his house, and they told him, "You've defiled our caste. You now have to wash the feet of 90 priests and drink the water from that." He refused, and so he was thrown out, himself and his crockery. In India, you cannot touch a crockery that was held by somebody else. So if you go to a roadside stall and buy chai, tea, it's made of earthenware. You drink it, then you throw it. When you go to a function, nobody touches the lips to the glass. They drink it like this without touching. Because all about touchability, untouchables. So he was so sick of that, he told himself he would help children because he sees that alone, untouchables, caste issues, poor poverty. He wants to change all that, and so he changed his name. It was the first thing he did. And I admire him because before I joined, he was not about marketing, branding, nothing. And we made a concerted effort after he won the Peace Prize to go out there and get funding to talk about this issue globally. He's done some global work, but not at that level before. So I really admire what he does. He does legislative changes at the top. So he will promulgate texts that will go into changes in terms of sex trafficking definition, banning certain things. But after that, what happens? There's a law called the Right to Information Act in India. He uses the RTI, the Right to Information Act, to ask the Supreme Court what's happened after that. And so the Supreme Court then instructs all the it's a federal system. They instruct the states to report back. And the states hate us. The Minister for Women and Children before this one hated us because we want enforcement. There's no point having a law without enforcement. And on the ground, too, we do raids. We do grassroots stuff. So it's very unusual to have a nonprofit that does both the macro level as well as the micro. And I just love the work that he does.
So let's take a minute now and talk about the victims of sexual trafficking. Okay? Many people who find themselves caught in this web of exploitation have often been abused previously. Could you comment on steps that have been made to combat the plight of children unwillingly caught up in this illegal sex industry?
So with trafficking, it's a bit different to the grooming that happens with general sexual abuse. So with general child sexual abuse, you're looking for someone who's a pedophile, who's just grooming a child. So somebody who's always available for babysitting, who knows the current lingo when it comes to youth and children. You know, he knows the word sick, he's totally in with the music, the video games, everything. He's always favoring one child over the other children and giving him or her undue attention. So that's grooming at the generic child sexual abuse level. With trafficking, it's very different. The traffickers are looking for a vulnerable group of people, runaways, homeless people, kids that have been in foster home. They would be the ones that are being targeted. Kids that have substance abuse issues. So they're easier to roll in. And so I just made a list of what do you look out for, because some of you would own businesses, work as employees, and these are the things you can look out for. Someone who's just nervous, looks disheveled, ungroomed, malnourished, a huge red flag, lives with his or her employer. If there's someone always with that person, always answering for that person, there's also an issue there. Ask questions like, are you okay? Are you in fear? Are you hurt? Do you have your ID with you? If not, who has it? And then call the National Trafficking Hotline. We have flashed the number before, but you can also Google it.
So yeah, thank you for bringing that slide. It's good. 20 years ago, child sexual abuse and human trafficking were rarely talked about. Now, with the proliferation of social media, most people are certainly aware that it's happening. Okay, what do you feel is the role of social media and what they play in the exploitation and also in the future reduction of child sexual abuse?
The social media platforms can do more. I sit on Twitter's Trust and Safety Council. So at the beginning, when we started in 2016, there were only 30 of us, and I represented Asia. There was one other guy from Japan. And we would advise Jack Dorsey, the CEO, on child online safety. So before they do roll a new product, we would advise, how does it impact trolling, cyberbullying, suicide? Because from the age of 13 onwards, you can join Twitter. I feel that social media platforms can do more because, for example, with Twitter, they would emphasize free speech more than child safety. If they have to pick, it's always freedom of speech. And sometimes I find that problematic. With Facebook and WhatsApp, Facebook owns WhatsApp. It's a messaging thing where you can make phone calls, videos for free. It's difficult because a lot of the traffickers are using Facebook and WhatsApp to transmit these pictures and convey them. And I like to say this too. Well, I work with Interpol. That's the Federation of Police. So you have 190 member states, America as a member, so all your Federation of Police join forces. It's under the UN ambit. With Interpol, they tell me that they have 50,000 new pictures of child sexual abuse material every month. 50,000. So if you post a picture of your child, of your niece or your nephew, naked in a swimming pool, something suggestive lying on lollipop, laying on the bed, anything that's suggestive, these guys are creative. They would remove it, doctor something else, and you can imagine what else is being inserted there instead. They sell those pictures. Those pictures are permanent. You can never delete it from the dark web. So even Facebook, Google, Twitter, the Internet Watch Foundation, they would ID every photo. You just take one photo, resize it, crop it, send it out again. It's a different picture, another different ID. You can't track it again. 50,000 images every month. So I always advise people, don't take frontal pictures sideways, take more from the back, cover the face if necessary, but really just don't post it. It's just too dangerous what goes on in there. We have seen a Facebook group in India that sells those pictures, for instance. There are many, many out there here in the US as well that does that as well. Here with the social media, there's also the positive side. So that's me in the picture. We had this campaign called Full Stop, where we painted our hands red and just went like that and took photos. With India, it was all about Bollywood, right? So we had actors and actresses come on board, and every time an actress or an actor put a photo like this out, it just went crazy in the numbers. The fans would start posting as well. So we reached 16 million people over 6 weeks, and that got Twitter's attention. So also there's also the good side of it.
So we're going to change direction here a little bit, and I'm going to ask you about another entity that you're involved with. And many of us in this auditorium get excited when we hear the word diplomacy, right? So I want you to explain the mission and vision of an organization you're involved with called the Diplomacy Lab. What makes it different than other diplomatic entities that are around?
The name lab itself is intuitive. It's like we want to disrupt diplomacy. And we were set up 5 years ago by the German Foreign Office. And so it's funded by them, as well as the BMW Foundation, the Robert Bosch Foundation, the Mercator Foundation, for example, and many more. And what we aim to do is to change the number of people in the room, because if it's the same people, you have the same intractable non-solution. For example, when we looked at the Syrian refugee crisis at its height a few years ago, we involved the Syrian diaspora in Germany and talked to them. Because how can you promote solutions without involving the people on the ground? And so that was really interesting, because 2 weeks ago I was back in Berlin. We had this couple, a refugee couple, back in 2015 that we were visiting, helping through a social economic enterprise. They left that place and started doing catering food. So the next year we were there in Berlin, we asked them to cater for us. 2 weeks ago, I was back in Berlin. They have their own restaurant now, 2 Syrian refugees. So that's the kind of story that we want to do, that it's micro, but at the same time also impacting foreign policy. Whatever recommendations that we do from the labs, we have 2 labs each year. We send it back to the Foreign Office for them to look at. We've worked with Chicago on the issue of youth violence. We've worked with ESMA, the Naval Academy in Argentina and Buenos Aires, because of the military junta experience from 76 to 83. They were very banged on looking at truth and justice because of what they've been through. And we were sitting there in the Naval Academy where they had 200 people, youth activists in their 20s, rounded up. They would slit open their bodies, throw them out of a naval plane. Their bodies were never found. And so we sit in a room trying to figure things out with them. We invited them to Germany. They come to Germany, see how the Germans have looked at the Holocaust experience and how they tried to deal with it. And so they came. And after spending some time with us, they were like, okay, let's not talk about truth and justice anymore. Let's talk about healing and reconciliation. And then for me, it's a win. We don't normally talk about that in diplomacy. But I think it's important to talk about other aspects that usually is not discussed in foreign policy, like healing, like reconciliation as well.
Great. Sounds like a great organization to be involved with, and certainly making a difference in people's lives. So Lynn, last weekend, my wife and I put on our cross-country skis. We went up to Shady Lane in the vineyard, cross-country skied in the beautiful sunshine, the 26-degree weather, for about an hour and a half, and then toasted our success with a bottle of wine. You are involved in something very similar, albeit a bit more challenging in April. So please talk about your proposed trip to the Arctic, why you're doing it, and how you intend to make that trek, and maybe what you hope to avoid on that specific journey.
Yeah, polar bears. You know, we were actually meant to be up there last year. So I was up in Svalbard, the 78th parallel, and they called us in for a meeting, and we thought, most of us, there's only 200 people who are crazy enough to do this every year. So in comparison, there's about 700 to 800 that does Everest, and there's only a smaller number for us. So we all gathered there, thinking it was a press conference, you know, and they would tell us stuff. And they were like, oh, you know, it's global warming, so the ice is melting, it's not long enough to land a plane. So we can take a small number of people, but we can be sure we can take you out again. And we're like, and then they said, we are canceling the North Pole season. And we're like, wait, what? So, because you spent years training, you spent years fundraising. So this year, we're going to try and attempt the same. We don't know what's going to happen. Why am I doing this? To raise awareness in child sexual abuse. Because I was a media spokesperson when I was in India, and the media doesn't love anything better than a cookie story, right? And what's a cookie story? Then a former diplomat from a tropical island wanting to ski to the North Pole. And then they'd be like, okay, but why are you doing that? And that's why I talk about my cause. And it's not too bad. The last degree was about 101 miles, but really it's longer because you're going east to try and go across the water. It's breaking up. It's global warming. Ice flows everywhere. And polar bears, and yeah. So it's really not fun. Not necessarily difficult, but not fun either. And it's it's minus 40, it's minus 50 degrees, and we have to pull our own sled, so our own food, our own gear. I always say that the mountaineers have a better time. Do you have Sherpas? You go back to your base camp with a cup of tea, food is there. For us, we have to go after a long day of half slogging and a half marathon, you have to pat down the snow, you have to collect snow and melt your water, then you make your own food. So you exhausted by the end of the day. But it's 10 days. I'm looking forward to it. I just want to get it done. Yeah.
But once you get it done, you have plans for another endeavor the following year.
I don't know if I can raise the money to South Pole. It's always been a dream. I was a dorky kid, and I read about Shackleton and Captain Scott, and I was so enamored, when one of the guys said, I'm just going to go out for a quick while. He knew when he went into the blizzard, he was never coming back. And I was 10, and I was so enthralled by the story. That is such heroism, in a tragic way. And that was always been up there at the back of my head. So one morning, I woke up when I was in Delhi, and I was like, let's do the South Pole. And then I realized somebody else has been there before me, another Singapore lady, and I thought, and it takes 2 months anyway. And with the North Pole, it's 10 days. I'll be the first Singapore national ever. So I thought, okay, let's do the North Pole. Let's switch. Just harder. You have to learn how to take a rifle, avoid the polar bears.
Well, we wish you much luck.
Thank you.
With both of those challenges, I should put that. So finally, let me ask you a question. What is your message for girls and boys, social workers, sexual abuse advocates, and law enforcement agencies in the Traverse City area?
People always ask what they can do, and I think you can do it now in your present capacity. You don't have to wait for schools, you don't have to wait for social services to do it for you. Just learn the topic about grooming, what to look out for in somebody who's trying to groom a child. Somebody, like I said before, somebody who's always too available, always too familiar with the lingo. For those of you who are activists or want to be an activist, sign up with your nonprofits here. There are some of you here in the audience, and there's also a booth outside. Sign up, volunteer, learn more about the issue. It's a very difficult topic, but I think if all of us do our part, and the numbers show for itself too. Here in the US, it's 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys have been sexually abused. So it means in this auditorium, a quarter of you ladies and 6 of you men have been through what I've been through. So for me, it's a mission. Just saving the one child, it's good. That's good for me. And I think all of us can do a bit.
Good. Well, Lynn, thank you very much for your advocacy, for your energy, for your desire to end child sexual abuse worldwide. We appreciate you coming here and sharing your thoughts.
Thank you.
Thank you. So what we're going to do now, as we do at every IAF event, is open up the questions to the audience. And please feel free to address those to Lynn. I know we actually have another advocate here. Linda Solom is here from an organization that is really involved with ending... Oh. Oh, she's not able to join us. Okay. Well... All right, well, we'll have Layla come up and talk a little bit about what's being done in our corner of the world regarding human trafficking.
Thank you. So just to say that there is an organization locally called Human Compassion. Linda Solomon is the president. She was supposed to be here to say a few words about local action, and she's unfortunately ill. But Michigan is the second greatest trafficking state in the country, as I understand it. And there is a significant problem of trafficking in West Michigan. They've begun organizing a human trafficking coalition to fight the problem in the UP, and now Linda and Human Compassion is spearheading the organization of a coalition to work in northern Michigan. We at IF would be happy to put you in touch with them or the Children's Advocacy Center, which is represented here, could also put you in touch if you want to learn more, become more aware, and take action. So,
thank you, Leila.
But we can take questions.
You will take questions now from the audience, right here.
Hello, my name is Maureen. Thank you for being here. So I'm wondering, when you suspect that someone is being trafficked, and we have a local organization that you can call, I'd like to understand what actually happens after that call is made, what authorities take over this, and just the process that gets put in order after a phone call is made.
So I mentioned the National Trafficking Hotline. Number was flashed earlier. What happens is that if you call that line, they try to ensure that law enforcement officials that come have been trained to deal with the trafficking survivor. Why I see that's important is because sometimes if the person has not been trained, you don't have that victim-centered approach, a trauma-sensitive approach, and that's really crucial. And then from then on, what happens is that you do have the investigations, and the person will be put in a safe place. And then usually it depends as well, because if a trafficking survivor is giving testimony against the trafficker, most of them, let's say if it's undocumented, they have this fear that this means they will be deported. Sometimes they will get a T visa so that they can stay temporarily in this country to give them the assurance that things can be worked out, to try and find them something so that they don't get deported immediately, because the testimony is critical towards catching the traffickers. So the U.S. State Department has actually worked towards that, which I think it's really a model to follow for destination countries for trafficking, which the U.S. is.
Back there? Oh, right here.
Thank you. I'm curious to what degree the smuggling and trafficking routes are known in different parts of the world, and what those networks are like, not the actual social media networks or anything like that, and how easily they could be disrupted, and whether they are, is this a type of trafficking that is really a niche market, or is our large smuggling organizations, is this more or less one of their, to put it somewhat crudely, one of their lines of business?
Your question is a good one, and it makes me really sad. In India, the work that we do, it's basically breaking up a supply chain, right? So let's say it's a child victim. He or she is 10% of the cost of an adult wage rate, which is what they do in the first place. And so it's a dangerous work. You're breaking up a supply chain, and then they have to find a new route, a new way to bring these people over. So you're breaking up the route, so then they have to start making a new route. But it's dangerous work. You're working against the mafia. It was only 2000 that the UN did this Palermo Protocol linking this to the issue of organized crime. When I was in Nairobi 2 years ago, I thought I've seen it all, living in India, working there. And then I was in Kenya, and we started talking about organ trafficking. And I'm not talking about that right now. But there's also another route in Africa where they bring people from Cameroon, Mali, out to Europe, wherever that needs to go, and people don't come back. also, I was in Indonesia the same year in 2018, in August, to work with a journalist friend. So Indonesia is made up of 74,000 islands. In the easternmost of the long islands, and the one, Bali is here, Jakarta, Bali, and this is Nusa Tenggara East. In Nusa Tenggara East is majority Christian. The people there are told things by people that they trust, including the churches, that need to go, they have a vision for them, they need to go abroad, there's a thing, and you can go and stay with my relative or my sister. They go to Malaysia, they go to the Middle East, they come back in body bags. And so now there's a concerted effort by the community to try and stamp out this I don't know what to call that, fake worship leaders, to try and handle the issue at the community level. But I'm trying to see what we can do here in the US to maybe come there and encourage them, because it's really, really awful. My girlfriend documented the coffins that came back. And it's really sad because they're alone. The reason why people go, they're alone, they have no one to go to, they thought they have a new employment, a new job. So they come back in a coffin, people don't know who that person was, what his or her denomination was. And so you have the priest, the nun, every denomination praying over the coffin. And it was a picture that I took because I also write, so I wrote a story on that, and my friends' photos were up there. It's such a powerful photo. Just the cargo, the back of the cargo plane, open the back, there's a coffin, people praying over there in the dead of the night. A really powerful picture, and really, really sad. So yes, the routes are everywhere. It's international, it goes everywhere. So in the US, it comes Mexico, Philippines, whatever. Asia as well. In Myanmar, seafood industry, there's people who are enslaved, work on boats 24 hours, 20 hours. If they try to escape, they get killed and thrown aboard. Vietnam, the same thing. So it really is endemic. In India, you have bonded labor. That means, for example, my father promised that I would pay off I take a loan, and then there's an exorbitant interest rate, and you promise that you pay off the debt. And if you don't pay off the debt, your son will pay off the debt, and that's bonded labor. And that's very common in India. And so this slavery is part of the whole trafficking thing. They don't know their rights. It's forced labor. So it's just really everywhere, the routes. You can look it up. It keeps changing because we are going after them, but they will just find another route. Yeah.
Okay, back here.
I was wondering if you know whether or not the United States still allows people who are traveling on diplomatic immunity, for example, Saudi Arabians, are allowed to still bring their servants who are actually slaves.
I don't know about the specificity for that, and I know it's become an issue. I think it would be by a country-by-country basis. So, for example, with Saudi Arabia, and there's a known case of a I've read of cases where a diplomat has been accused in DC and of bringing an Indian who is, forced because the passport's taken away and there's no recourse to leave. Normally, what the government would do is a case-by-case basis. So it's just on the diplomat, on that particular person, as opposed to the country. But I don't know whether in this instance there are anything repercussions against a country per se. I don't know about the details of that.
Is there any attempt to rescue those servants?
Yes. Usually, if it comes to light, the person will be taken away, and then investigations will be done. And I know there was such a case a few years ago, exactly with that, with an Indian maid that was brought to DC. I think, it was New York, I can't remember which one. But there were persecution taken against the Indian diplomat that brought their person there because he or she had no recourse to passport. Sorry?
What about repercussions?
Immunity, so for example, let me just give you an example. A Romanian diplomat ran over somebody in Singapore several years ago. If Romania releases person's immunity, we can prosecute. But if the country does not want to and takes the person back, there's not much that we can do as the host country.
So I know specifically for child sexual abuse, a lot of the time police cases are never filed, whether it's lack of evidence because it happened so long ago or whatever may be the case. And I know it's very, very hard to ever get a solid case against the perpetrator or whoever did it. So my question is, how can like either officials or us help to make it easier for the perpetrators to be punished for what they did rather than putting the victims through countless trials, interviews, whatnot, for it to just end with a case being dismissed?
The US, you have the CASA, the Child Advocacy Center thing. So it's actually improved the way you help children go through the process. So you have a befriender who goes through the process with the child. And that's a lot better because in my book, I documented the story of Sasha, who's American, who had to retell his story over and over again as an 8-year-old. And then his uncle was in the New York synagogue, who was a cantor there. And the congregation there put money behind him. And they would say things like, oh, Sasha said this and this thing. And then now he's saying this, he's a liar. He's 8. He was 8. And after 9 years of that back and forth, he finally gave up trying to persecute his uncle in court. But with CASA, I think it's easier because you have that befriender service. In Singapore, what we do is we just do the one-time video of the child. And then that video is used to look by the forensic people, the police, the nurses, everybody, so that the child doesn't have to go through the trauma repeating every single thing, every single time. That happens as well. The other thing that I think would be an issue would be the statute of limitations. In certain countries, because with how sexual abuse is, you internalize the trauma. And then when you first have your first sexual encounter is awakened, and then your 20s, you're trying to figure it out. And then you're in your 30s, still trying to get healed. And then the statute of limitations is over. It differs from country to country. In Singapore, there isn't, and the UK, there isn't, but in some countries, it's 20. So sometimes it's too short for you to go after your perpetrator. And by that time, it's over. You can't actually press charges against the person anymore. Because in the law, the statute of limitation has run out. You have no recourse to address. So if it's, in some countries, survivors are trying to change that so that they have the recourse to justice.
Good question. We have someone over here in the middle.
I don't see a mic, so I'll shout.
Okay, maybe.
Do you want to go there?
Are you having any success?
A minute. Thank you, Anna.
Are you having any success in rescuing children who are forced into and then flee from the narco-trafficking gangs, sometimes within the United States, sometimes they flee from other countries into the United States? How are these children being protected or neglected?
I don't have any experience on that here in the US. The only experience I can tell you about is from the South Asia, Indonesian perspective. With drugs, what I can tell you though is here in the US, when you try to mark your victims, for example, there's one case study where perpetrators would try to look for women who are about to be released from prison, but they look for those who have substance abuse history. And then they would, because in the US, you can send money to people in prison. And then they will start having a friendship with this woman, make them dependent, or make her believe that he is her boyfriend. And then, so this is part of the grooming tactics for traffickers. Then they lure them in. So then when they come out, they really have nobody. They look for people with that kind of record. And then they get them dependent on drugs. And after a few weeks, turn around and say, you owe me. And this is how it's done here in the US with young women with substance abuse history.
Hi, I was given a microphone. My name is Mac. I'm a student here at NMC. And I was wondering if someone finds himself in a situation where they notice a person has a lot of the signs that they may be being trafficked and you want to do something about it, what is the safest way to go about doing that?
If you feel that you can't go up to the person and ask questions, the best thing is to call the National Trafficking Hotline and ask them to do a welfare check, and then you've done your job. We're not asking you to be a hero. It's always good to be safe, and they will know what to do.
Thank you.
You have to remember also, if it's a real trafficking situation, the trafficker is nearby. The person is usually not left alone.
Hi, I'm also a student from NMC.
Hi.
I had a question, just because a lot of, not a lot, but there are victims of trafficking that sometimes don't realize that they're victims until it's obviously too late. But even with recent situations like the Epstein trial, and you hear of situations where there are young girls who are groomed and led into areas, and a lot of times their parents are even consenting to this, and then all of a sudden they're on a plane and they're headed to another destination, and it's, even if they come back home in between, it's this continuing cycle. How can we better ourselves, either personally or our government, in order to kind of track these sort of consensual but non-consensual interactions between adults and children?
For me, it's very simple. If you're under 18, there is no consent. It doesn't matter if she says yes, if he says yes. It doesn't matter if your body is reacting positively. There is no consent when it comes to children. With the Me Too movement, with Epstein, it was different because a lot of them were 14-year-olds. But for me, as long as the person is 18 and below, absolutely no issue when it comes to consent. The Me Too for me would be sexual assault if it's above 18 and there's no consent involved. So for me, it's very, very clear. Does that answer? Yeah, I hope that answers your question. So what we can do, I think it's important to talk about this. Having this kind of platform where we can talk about it, dispel the myths and taboos surrounding child sexual abuse. You know, I was in Mumbai one time and I was asked a question. It was a bunch of, it was the Rotary Club that organized it. And it was 300 to 400 teachers like you, just sitting here in the auditorium. And they asked, one teacher stood up and asked, you know, I know an 8-year-old boy, and he enjoyed it. Is it okay? And I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Nobody said anything in that crowd. She's a teacher, and she asked that question. So for me, it doesn't matter, you know, body reaction, none of that. A child is from a child. What Epstein did was absolutely wrong. And there's always this issue now with the Me Too, whether it's a false accusation, blah, blah, blah. If it's an adult, let's talk about that. But if it's below 18, no consent. There's no such thing as consent for a child.
I meant more about the parents that, like,
allowed it to happen. Unfortunately, it's true. It happens in the Philippines, for instance. So you have child online sexual abuse. So parents want the children to be online because they think it's less harmful than being physically touched. So the customers are Western customers. You pay for the child to be stripped, to do things with other children, to do things with adults. It's sick. And the Philippines is known for this in the NGO world. Is it wrong? Oh, yes, it's completely wrong. As a parent, it's your duty to protect your child. And that's, you know, it's covered by law. Anything you do to gratify your needs or the needs of the client to get transaction, whether it's in kind or it's a monetary transaction, that's outright child sexual abuse.
I'm back here, Jim.
Oh.
So I want you to know that NMC's psychology, human sexuality class is here tonight. So we welcome you. Some of the students that have asked questions are from my class. And one of the things I'd like you to address is we're at a college campus. And students often don't realize that they can be targeted in particular. They're offered nanny jobs, they take those, they travel. Turns out to be a very different situation. They're encouraged to do online chat porn, video rooms, and think that that's a great short-term way to make money for this very select group of people that are fitting into your categories. So for a town like Traverse City, Michigan, northern Michigan, can you just say something about, on a campus, what we all need to be aware of?
Yeah, that's a very good question. In fact, in the US, generally, 20-25% of sexual assaults of women are done on campus. So it's actually very, very pertinent. What we can do, I think, to just educate our young ones. Also educate yourself if you're a college-bound, college-going. Learn about how to be safe. It's one thing to earn money by doing things like this online, but then you need to know that there's also going into the exploitation part of it. And what part of that makes it okay or not. I mean, it's going to be traumatic. The impact of it, even though you think that there is no touch involved, but if there's lewd messages, if there's demeaning messages, if there's things that he or she tells you to do, in the long term, that will affect you, psychologically speaking, because it's also about lack of respect, lack of boundaries, and this would be inimical for you in the long term. So I think it's best if we can talk about this again openly, talk about this on campus, have people, you already having that class already is one huge step towards this process, so that's wonderful. Talking about it in the local papers, having people talk about experiences as well, so that you can name the problem, so that you're not saying, I don't know this person, it's never happened to me, or I don't think it happens here in Traverse City. You need to talk about it and say, it's happened, it happens. We need to stop this kind of assault on campus, online or physically. Yes, one is up there.
To pick up where you just left off, a number of years ago, when I first came to Traverse City, I performed a funeral for a couple. And their children, in part of the planning of the funeral, acknowledged that their parents had made them available locally to friends in Traverse City. So I think it's important for us to recognize that even even the significance of all the international routes and things like that, that there were people in this community who were aware and kept that family secret. And so it's important for us to acknowledge, when we encounter these situations, as you said, to tell those stories, to go to the proper authorities and not hide behind the fact that it could never happen here.
That's a very good point. And the U.S. State Department last year, in its report for Trafficking in Persons report, noted that 77% of trafficking takes place within the country. So it's always very easy to get all heated up about transnational boundaries and what we can do and everything. It takes place in our country, and the U.S. is no exception. So it's a very good point.
Okay, we have time for maybe one more question.
Jim, on the back. Thank you for being here. Towards the back here, sorry.
Okay.
I appreciate your work with Twitter. I'm interested in the changes we're seeing in the internet and social media in terms of allowing channels for this kind of communication, file sharing, document sharing. We're seeing a lot of debate now with Facebook, for example, and whether or not they're going to start to take action against something like white supremacy organizations and things like this as well. But I think this really plays into human trafficking and sharing of child sexual imageries. And as users of these products, what can we do to help promote more responsibility in that regard? And what responsibility do we need to ask of these organizations?
It's really hard to get your feedback across, to be very honest, to Facebook, to Twitter. But if you see something and you see something that's wrong, report it. Explain to Twitter or Facebook why this is offensive, what is wrong with it, and insist that it's taken down. So for me, sometimes it's just not enough. It depends on how severe it is. The post, take it down. The organization, get it banned, get it blocked. There's different actions that you can take. I still feel strongly that the platforms can do a lot better than they currently do right now, especially on the issue of child online abuse. Yeah.
So I want to thank you all for coming out tonight. Irlani, thank you for being here, for answering the questions.